On Nationwide this evening, our final programme this week dedicated to the First World War, we get some expert advice on war memorabilia, meet the couple who dug a trench in their garden, and sing the songs of the Great War. The War Memorial Gardens here at Island Bridge exude a simple dignity, and there's a wreath-laying ceremony taking place here today. It's hosted by the Royal British Legion, and it's commemorating the at least 35,000 Irish soldiers who died during the Great War from 1914 to 1918.
Over 200,000 Irish soldiers took part in the fighting, and the virtual disappearance of this World War from our history books until relatively recently meant a general lack of awareness about the extent of Irish involvement in the fighting. Our own archives in RTE are in short supply of first-hand accounts, but there are some, and here now are the recollections of some Irish soldiers with memories of life on the front.
It's a very hard question. Why did you join the army? There was no king and country about it. It's just the anxiety to get in the fight, that the war was on and everybody was joining up.
I remember now when we were going into the Battle of the Somme. We all got general absolution. That was the thing when you were heard of. And we were told that if we were killed, we would go straight to heaven. And we believed it.
You got to try and visualise, you see, in open trenches, like that kind of thing. But you were cold, you were hungry, you were wet and everything like that. But you couldn't say that we were living in the sense of the word. It was sheer punishment.
You couldn't leave anything down, the rats would eat it on you.
The lights were eating the flesh off the live ones, and the rats were eating the flesh off the dead ones. And that's the way we looked at it.
During the night, you were shooting here and there and keep going up and down, pretend there was a terrible lot of us. There was no one. Be about 6 or 7 whole line.
For every man we had, they had 20, and for every gun we had, they had 20.
I got in the way of a 5.9 shell, pushed them. And nearly, they just saved this arm from being taken off.
I got shot through the mouth and out here in the back.
Some poor devils that died from gas, they died in agony. And you know, you could tell it. You could tell the lads lying around dead on a battlefield, you could tell the ones that died from the gas because of the contorted features.
Every soldier has a dressing there, and you use that on anyone, German or Bulgar or Turk or anything else. You've got that natural instinct. If you see a man lying in wounded and pain, you go to him.
We shared our last cigarette. We shared our last bite of food. We shared our lives in the sense of the word, because I was quite prepared, and any of them was quite prepared to risk their life to help a chum. And they done it. To the flower of the nation over there in Flanders, the lying on the battlefields all over the world. They said, if ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep. I wonder if them lads are sleeping. Are they sleeping peacefully? I don't think so.
Those men were interviewed 25 years ago by my colleague Michael Lee, and hopefully they are sleeping more peacefully now. Unfortunately, those men did not get the credit they deserved, because events back home, the Rising and its aftermath, brought deep bitterness for those who had served with the British forces. We are moving on in time for this centenary, which has prompted reawakenings, reanalysis, ceremonies and lots of tributes.
Edwardian Music Hall may not have an automatic association today with the atrocities of the First World War, but it was in places like the Gaiety Theatre here that the songs of the Great War were sung. People on the home front felt a real need to hear these songs in what were very difficult times.
The music of the First World War was, generally speaking, the recorded music, now the official music if you like, was generally very, very chirpy, very, very positive. Nobody dies. By and large, it is written not so much for the troops, because the troops knew exactly what was going on. It's written for the home front and to keep their spirits up.
It's a long way to Tipperary. It's a long way to go.
And in World War I, the music industry was big business. Sheet music sales, and with the arrival of the phonograph came the phenomenon that was the recording artist, like our own John McCormack. Though this was one of the best known songs of the war, it was in fact written by a music hall artist, Jack Judge, before the war in 1912. Conor, here we are, 2014. We're talking about It's a Long Way to Tipperary, and we actually have the original piece of sheet music published in 1912.
That's right, yes, we have the physical copy of the music here, which is in great condition, I have to say. I think it's from the Irish Music Archive. Let me just play you a little bit of it. And I don't think people will be that familiar with this opening, so we have... Then we have this lovely little bit of Irish Americana. So we have this little kind of quiet man kind of little thing going on.
We'll never associate that with It's a Long Way to Tipperary.
Never, not at all. And then we get into the lyrics, so we have... Up to mighty London came an Irishman one day. As the streets were paved with gold, sure everyone was gay, singing songs of Piccadilly, Strand and Leicester Square. And Paddy got excited, then he shouted to them there. And then it's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go.
Where it becomes associated with the First World War is in August 1914, when the Connacht Rangers, the battalion of the Connacht Rangers, are marching through Boulogne, and apparently some of them had been to a Jack Judge concert in the Gaiety Theatre in Dublin. They started to sing the song, and a Daily Mail reporter called George Curnock overheard it, mentioned it in his report in the Daily Mail, and nowadays you'd say it went viral.
The music hall was also used as a way of recruiting soldiers, often as part of an evening of emotive and highly charged war songs. The recruiting would be done by the artists from the actual stage.
Oh, we don't want to lose you, but we think you ought to go for your king and your country. Both need you so.
Another classic song from the First World War is Pack Up Your Troubles, and it's still very popular today. And I understand it won a competition when it was first composed.
It did indeed, yes. It was written by two brothers, Felix and George Powell, two Welsh brothers, and it is concerns this funny little private who makes everybody happy around him. His Private Perks. I'll play you a little bit of it.
And chirpy.
Here it's very chirpy, yeah. Is a funny little codger with his smile, his funny smile. 5 feet none, he's an artful little dodger with his smile, his funny smile. Flush or broke, he'll have his little joke, he can't be suppressed. All the other fellows have to grin when he gets this off his chest. Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, 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 while you've a lucifer to light your fag. Smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It's never worthwhile. Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile.
That's very chirpy and it's very rousing, isn't it?
It's very chirpy and rousing, and it was actually modified to be that way because apparently before the competition it was originally written in a different version in 6/8 time rather than march-in time, which would have made it sound something like this.
Yes, very nice, Connor, but the brothers would never have won the competition with that version. So they're the kind of songs people at home wanted and needed to hear. But meanwhile, in the trenches, soldiers made up their own songs. Now, they were based on familiar melodies, and they were about the kind of things that concerned the soldiers. So in effect, they were less about king and country and more about mud and blood.
Bombed last night, bombed the night before. Gonna get bombed tonight like we never been bombed before. When we're bombed, we're scared as we can be. Can't stop the bombing sent from higher Germany.
These songs tended to be very, very irreverent. They tended to be very short because they were communicated verbally, essentially. So in order to be able to remember them, they had to be short. They weren't really written down. And they were very, very sharp, and they were about things that concerned the soldiers. So this is why these songs were the antidote to the recorded songs.
I don't want to be a soldier. I don't want to go to war. I'd rather stay at home, around the streets to roam, and live off the earnings of a lady typist. I don't want to bang it in me belly.
The Defence of the Realm Act meant songs like these could get you thrown in jail, so soldiers didn't dare to write them down, and subsequently they weren't recorded. When it came to anti-war songs, a few Irish ones did survive.
One of them is a song which was actually written, we know who wrote it, Seamus O'Farrell, a Dublin journalist in 1915, and it's called The Recruiting Sergeant. And in this song, somebody is wandering down the street and encounters a recruiting sergeant. The recruiting sergeant spins him a whole web of lies and tells him that, it's perfectly comfortable in Flanders and everything is great and you should go and join up. And the potential recruit plays him along for a while and points out it may be hot in Flanders, but it's drafty in the trenches and all this kind of stuff, before eventually coming to the point, which is that there's a fight to be had and there's a job to be done in Dublin, and let Englishmen fight for England and not Irishmen.
As I was walking down the road, a feeling fine and larky, recruiting sergeant came to me. You look fine in khaki,
Another great Irish anti-war song, anti-recruiting song, hard to know which because we don't know exactly when it was written and we don't know who wrote it, is a Cork song called Salonika, which was disinterred by Jimmy Crowley in Stoker's Lodge a number of years ago.
Me husband's in Salonika, I wonder if he's dead. I wonder if he knows he has the kid with a fancy head. So right away, so right away, so right away, Salonika, right away, he's altar mine.
Then along came another much later generation of songwriters like Eric Bogle, whose approach to the subject of World War I was more reflective and questioning.
The old men march slowly, all bones stiff and sore. The tired old heroes from a forgotten war.
And the young people ask, what are they marching for? And I ask myself the same question. And the band plays Waltzing Matilda.
Bogle is coming at it from two points of view. He's coming at it from the point of view of the Scot, and bear in mind, 1 in 4 Scots recruits in World War I were killed. 1 in 4, 25%, the highest average in the UK. By comparison, 1 in 9 English recruits died. So this is Eric Bogle, Scot, going to Australia and becoming fascinated by the preoccupation with Anzac Day, with Gallipoli in Australia. And he writes the wonderful, wonderful song the band played, Waltzing Matilda.
And the band played Waltzing Matilda, and the old men still answer the call.
Then he writes The Green Fields of France. Then he writes a song called All the Fine Young Men. So you have this fantastic trilogy of songs.
They're just forgotten bones lying far from their homes, forgotten as the cause for which they died.
Oh, young men, can you see now why they lied?
Keep an eye out for the Great War Roadshow with lots of songs from the First World War. It'll be travelling to Cavan, to Castlebar, to Tala and to Blanchardstown. And just to let you know, Miles Dungan's book, Irish Voices from the Great War, published by Merriam Press, is available in bookshops now. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Anne gets to see a much treasured family album, which is now a valuable historical document about the Irish soldiers in Gallipoli. We'll talk to you again in a couple of minutes. You're welcome back to Nationwide. As part of this special programme commemorating the centenary of the First World War, we've come now to Trinity College, where the World War I Roadshow is attracting big crowds. It's being run in conjunction with the National Library and RTE. It's a day of talks, lectures, music and drama. One of the main attractions is this concept of family history collections, where members of the public come along and they bring letters and photos and mementos from the war, and they want to have them examined by experts and also to have them catalogued on a European online archive.
Meanwhile, I'm armed with my own memorabilia. Meet my grandfather, John Casson. Not only have I his photograph, but I have other bits and pieces which I gleaned recently after a conversation with my father.
As Anne is queuing to take her turn and have a chat with the experts, I've come along here to see what might have enticed people like her grandfather to join up and fight in the First World War. Jane, these are the advertising of the day.
Yes, they are. They're very impressive, aren't they?
And these were pre-radio days, so they had to be impressive.
Had to blare out the message. Very simple slogans, reducing very complex ideas to just, there's bad guys, do something about them.
The appeal in most of these posters here is specifically Irish. So you've got the colleen, you've got the harp.
Yes, it's very interesting because the early posters that were used were just the generic ones that were produced in England, and they began to realise that you're going to have to address your audience. So there are very specific things to recognise about the Irish one. More images of women appear in the Irish one, which clearly has something to do with the Irish identity, pure Irish womanhood. A lot of references to defending your home. A lot of use of the colour green. One of the posters has a leprechaun on it. Some of them have Irish wolfhounds. Every single part of the iconography addresses something that they have figured is not being addressed by another poster. It's all saying, are you Irish? What does it mean to be Irish? And what is an Irish person in the context of what we're asking you to do? How are you going to respond? This is what we're asking you to defend. Are you going to answer the call?
And I suppose as the war progressed and people were beginning to know about the horrors of it, they had to even be more encouraging, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And they were really quite good at it, even though we're talking about quite an early period of time. You know, we think we're very psychologically aware, but they clearly were too, because they figured out what is causing the people we want to enlist not to enlist, and they would address it directly. So for example, you get a lot of reference to male health and physique, and making it out like a big adventure sport for young men to be tempted away. Of course, young men who wouldn't have travelled before, so it's come out and have fun, manly fun, you know. And the horrors were played down very much, unless it was horrors caused by Germany, in which case it was protect your family and your home from this horrible German attacker.
They really are a window on social history of the time, aren't
Yeah, they're a little bit creepy though, do you not think? Because it's so manipulative. These are such young people, quite unsophisticated, and here it is, protect your mother, protect your sister, bad Germans. You know, they are what they are of their time, but you can't have looking at them with 21st century eyes and saying, who did you send to war?
Now let's go along and see how Anne's getting on, see if she's making any progress.
These items belonged to my grandfather,
Yes.
John Casson. He was a Lance Corporal with the Royal Engineers.
Right. Now let's have a look at the items.
Okay.
So this is the letter of release he received from his firm.
He was a postmaster,
Yes.
and obviously he worked for the British Civil Service. And he felt it was his duty to enlist when he was called up. And it's acknowledged in the letter there that he's been congratulated for doing his patriotic duty.
Yes.
He was 34 years old when he signed up, and he was married already with 3 children. And because he had worked in the postal service, he went as a telegraphist.
Yes. Being a specialist, he would have been employed in that capacity. That would have been very valuable to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in regards to that, I do have a letter which enlists itemised some of his duties, Tom. And if there's handwriting there, and it talks about the jobs and the chores that he has to do in the signal room.
Yes.
Now, he was a lance corporal, so I presume he might have had responsibility for.
He would have responsibility for a squad, we'll say, of about 8 men. That would be usual. A lance corporal's duty would be in that region. And he's being detailed for these particular. The duties are being listed: telephone room, mess room, clerk's room, laundry, main staircase, entrance hall, pavement in front of stores. He would be tasked with overseeing this.
This is his pay book, and I've looked at the dates of those, and this first entry.
Castle John, Royal Engineers, irregular.
Now, what does that mean?
He was a regular soldier. He was a full-time. He wasn't a reservist.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Regimental pay, 1 and 6. He wasn't overpaid. Service pay, 1 and 4 pence. Total 2 and 10 pence.
And when you see it, when it flips over the page, the payment goes into francs at some point. Yeah.
So he was being paid in the local currency.
Yeah, and that goes on
1917 into 1918.
Another part that I was intrigued by, Tom, was the will page.
Yes.
But my grandfather's is blank.
Yes. Well, he clearly chose not to make a will.
I kind of like that cast of mind in his, that he didn't complete it. Now, this document, Tom, I'm not really clear about it. I've only glanced over this. What does this tell us?
It's a certificate of demobilisation. In other words, of him being stood down, discharged in effect.
All right.
And it's the army form. It's a specific army form, Z21. His number, his service number, it was what, 165695, Lance Corporal, Cassin John. And he's the Regiment or Corps Cavalry Director. The Director of Cavalry was responsible for his enlistment. He was called up for service on the 13th of November 1916.
Okay, so we now know when he started.
And he was called into the Royal Engineers.
Yes.
And he wasn't awarded any medals or decorations, I'm afraid. He served overseas on active service. And then he's transferred to the reserve. In other words, he's discharged in effect on the 21st of September 1919.
Well, this is the man himself, actually.
Certainly a soldierly appearance.
Well, I tell you, this is a man who probably would have enjoyed wearing a uniform.
That's his rank, 1 stripe for Lance Corporal.
Right, okay.
And the bandolier, for ammunition. Very fit looking man.
Yeah, he was very proud of his.
Very athletic.
Yeah, he was very proud of his having served. Tom, this is something I have that grandfather brought back from the war. Something that, for me, brings the whole idea of war home, right? And this is a bayonet, a German bayonet that he came back from, that he brought back.
Well, there would have been a lot of kit when the Germans surrendered. They would have had to hand over a great deal of their equipment as part of the surrender agreement. And there would have been a lot of kit available as souvenirs. And bayonets would have been highly prized souvenirs. It's got German writing, you can barely decipher it here, it's faded. This slot and that stud, you see that's flexible. That would have slotted into a recess in the rifle, on top of the rifle, and it would have been held in firmly then.
There's a photograph he sent back from Namur.
Aha, it's a parade. British cavalry passing along the Rue de Waterloo Namur in November 1918. That was after the armistice.
And here's one here, seen on arrival at Namur, 22nd November 1918.
Yes.
You see that?
These would have been victory parades. Yes, because the war was over at this stage.
My father says that it was the biggest event in his entire life, his years serving in the war. But there were slings and arrows that people received after a certain period in this country. So he didn't really talk about it too much.
Yes. Memories of the war was virtually airbrushed officially out of Irish history. It was conveniently forgotten.
There's nothing quite compares with meeting people in their own homes if you want to get a good insight into their interests and passions. And over the years on this programme, I have to say, I've had the privilege of stepping beyond the front door of many people. And from what I've heard of Brian and Mary Kenny, who live just outside Gorey in County Wexford, their interest in the First World War throws up many surprises.
Hello, how are you?
Mary.
Nice to see you.
You're very welcome.
Come
ahead in.
All you
No
have
problem.
And this is the war room, Mary.
Wow, my goodness me, what a collection. Where do you get all the things?
We collected boot fairs, military affairs online. My personal interest is the human side of the war. As you can see, a lot of them is photographs. You can give a name of a person, but a photograph gives you the whole story, a picture of a man. You ask questions about him. Who was he? Where is he alive? Did he survive the war? Did he have a family? Did the family ever visit his grave if he was killed? And that's what makes it so important, is to remember these young men who actually never ever came home.
And is that one of the dreaded telegrams?
It is indeed, Mary. It's not an official one. It's a family one, and it's for Adam, killed in action there on the 13th of May. No mother would really want to receive that now, would they?
No, and I see the postmark is the first, it's either June or July 1915.
July 1915, yeah, indeed.
Goodness, it really brings it home to you, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
And what about this? This kind of has a domestic feel to it, Brian.
It has. This is the wash roll. Each soldier was issued with one of these. He had his spoon, his razor, his comb, spoon. This is his button stick. This would go over the uniform to stop the brass of getting onto the clothes itself. And you have, of course, the old-fashioned shaving brush itself, and the toothbrush, which is, compared to the toothbrushes of today, really old-fashioned. And this would be tied up in a roll and in the man's small pack, which he would carry with him on the battlefield.
Well, as I said, this is an amazing collection, but I believe it's only in the halfpenny place to what you have out the back garden.
You could say that.
Well, right,
just a little bit different. We certainly can, Mary.
Okay.
Let's go.
So is this the start of the journey?
This would be it. This is the bell tent where the officer would have his sleeping quarters and all his equipment, and that's where he would be living most of the time.
Oh my goodness, what an evocative scene. It's so stark, so barren.
That's as close, Mary, as you're going to get to the real thing from any pictures. The only thing you have missing there is the bodies of the soldiers themselves.
And what motivated you, Brian, to actually dig this trench? Did you wake up one morning and say, I'm going to go out and get a First World War trench?
It was a kind of an idea. You look at photographs of the First World War, the Western Front, the shell holes, the craters, and you'd often say, what was it like to live in those? So one day I said, I'm going to give this a go. And I went out and I started digging, and I just kept going.
Mary, would you share this enthusiasm? Are you as passionate about this as Brian is?
I am indeed. I didn't do any of the physical digging now, Mary, but I was engrossed watching it develop as much as you were seeing it for the first time. You know, it's fair dues to him.
So we have our homemade trench. All we're short now is a few soldiers.
Left, right, left, right, left, right, left.
Oh, there they are, in the form of the Irish Great War Society.
We're amateur living historians, yes. We meet up weekends during the summer, go around shows, some schools during the year when school time's on, and just show what life was like back in the Great War.
Tell us about the actual kit that you have there.
Well, at the moment I'm dressed in marching order. I'll be dressed for marching from into the lines and back from the lines. Some of the lads here is dressed in battle order. They're ready to go over the top.
I'd say this is going to be a busy summer for you, all told, 2014.
It is indeed. It is indeed. The anniversary now is upon us, and it's quite busy at the moment. We're booked out most weekends. Most of the lads will be finishing work and going straight into straight into this kit down to shows to bring it to the public.
Tell us about the kit that you're wearing.
Well, the kit I'm wearing is the lighter version we call Combat Order, in a little small pack instead of what Darren had, the big one. We just carry the bare essentials: knife, fork, spoon, plate, just for eating, have our water bottle, bayonets, and then on the back pouch here for carrying our shovels. This now is an entrenching tool. Used for,
and that would be in that little pouch there.
And then the handle would be hanging off the side. Use it obviously for, as all shovels, digging. But if worst came to worst in the trench, you know, used for hand-to-hand combat, self-defence.
That'd be pretty brutal, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it had to be done though. Fortunately close. The rifles were too long.
How long have you been a member of this group?
I've been a member now for 3 years.
And what's the appeal for you?
I've always had an interest in history, and I was friends with members beforehand, so kind of just got into it. It's just something different to be doing, you know. I'm not really into sports, it's more my sort of thing.
First we have the inspection.
Excellent. Excellent.
By the centre, quick! March!
And it's off to the front.
So Mary, this is First World War trench. This is typical of trenches of the period. It would be made of timber from anywhere you could get it from: doors, roof trusses, church pews, anything that would give the soldier protection from enemy shell fire or sniper fire.
Yeah, because they go right up above your head.
They would have to go right up above your head, and the very new soldier of the trench would be curious to see what no man's land would look like, and he would not know what's up there, and sometimes the unwary would be caught by the sniper.
And all the bits and pieces were adjacent.
Everything had to be close at hand. If the enemy attacked very, very quickly, you needed to get to your equipment very, very quickly. Here's a sample of what's called a trench club. These were used by the soldiers for going over at night time to capture enemy prisoners quietly. And if they didn't come quietly, they gave them a little taste of this. What they also used was cut down bayonets, and these were called trench knives. They were easy to carry, easy to conceal, not too you left all your webbing behind you and you went over. And this is another example of what's called a trench club. This is a much more nasty sample. They have the spike on the top of it for jabbing and cutting and knocking out. You had to go very, very quickly. It was a very nasty business.
And what about this little kind of alcove?
This here would be for the officer. He would have all his accoutrements in here: his bed, his chair, his table. Everything would be in here for the officers, especially for him. The ordinary soldier wouldn't be allowed to stay in here. He'd have to stay in the trenches in the front line.
And would you lie down and go asleep?
Sometimes they would. They'd rest on what's called the fire step, but there'd always be a soldier on sentry duty all the time. And an hour before morning, they'd what's called the stand to in case of German attack. And this hour would also be at night time, when the Germans would also be expected to attack.
I'd imagine, Brian, that in wet weather this would become pretty
It would be miserable, especially in the Ypres area where the high water level. The soldiers would be standing in ankle deep in water, but the Germans held the high ground, so all the water flowed down into that. And what happened was they got a thing called trench foot, which was literally rot the feet from off you. And they had to change their socks mostly every day if they were fortunate enough to have socks to clean. And there would also be an officer's inspection to check the men's feet. They got around this by putting whale oil on their feet, which kind of insulated it. But later in the war, they introduced trench waders, which cut down big time on trench foot. They were a simple, but it was so important to have those trench waders.
And cooking quarters were here as well?
Yes, the men cooked up. Sometimes they would cut alcoves in the trenches where they would cook inside of it, but they had to be very, very careful. If they had too much smoke, it gave away their position in the trenches, which the German artillery could then zoom in on.
And Brian, would the soldiers be busy in the trenches all the time?
Not a lot of them. Boredom was a big problem, Mary. People get the impression that soldiers spent every single day going over top, day after day after. It wasn't like that at all. Most of the time was spent just maintaining the trenches, bringing up fresh supplies, bringing in recruits as well to replace losses they had on it. And they would also be writing letters home. They actually had a brilliant postal service, believe it or not. They could have a letter within 2 or 3 days from England to the front line. It was a fantastic postal service.
So for these young men, all living happened here?
Yes, this was it. They lived and they died here. They would have lived in the same streets, played in the same football clubs, and they went to war together. And unfortunately, so many of those young men never came home.
Not only has Brian been busy digging his own trench, but he and his wife Mary have been busy gathering up very moving human stories about courageous local men in Wexford. And the name of their book is News from the Front, Gory and the Great War.
After the break, we meet the Dublin twins who've just donated their father's war album to the National Museum. In 1914, when war was declared, this very university, Trinity College, qualified its doctors and engineers a few months early because there was such a need for the war effort. One such medical student was Andrew J. Horn, who ended up in Gallipoli, now referred to as one of the most disastrous campaigns in military history. Lucky for Andrew, he came home alive and went on to have a successful career as a master in Holles Street. Lucky for us, Andrew was a keen photographer and left behind a treasured photo album which is now a significant historical document. Recently, I visited his twin daughters at home in Dublin.
And you're very welcome. Come in. I'm Margaret and this is Patricia, my sister. Hello. The day that my father was given his parchment, he said that coming down the steps in Trinity of the hall, the recruiting master was there and handed them their embarkation papers. They had 6 months, almost 6 months in England before they were detailed, and he was assigned to the 17th Field Hospital, which was linked to the Lancashire. Is it the 29th, I think, was the regiment, and set sail for Gallipoli.
Maybe you'd open the album of your father's photographs now and we'll have a look, because
I do that beautifully.
Beautifully. I'm very curious about these pictures. So this is a very significant photograph, isn't it?
It is.
And we're looking at an explosion that he captured.
Yes, yeah. And he says that was Gallipoli 1915, so it must have been when they arrived first. But the write-up continues because that's where they were also evacuated from. This is the flag he talked about, that on their first day they erected a Red Cross flag, and I presume it's very high up, in order to see if the Turks would allow the hospital and the operating theatre. It was a signal to them that this was the hospital. And that, so obviously the Turks did, because we saw the panorama of the hospital. And that's the hospital. You see all the way the hospital is put together.
So these are all the
tents.
The
These
tents,
are all
the casualty tents. Yeah.
On Cape Helles. That's the front lines, showing the Turks' front line and the British. So you can see how close they are in that. The only time he mentioned anything about going into the trenches personally himself was one occasion when his Batman, whom he had a tremendous admiration for, he writes in the book The Best of Fellows, and he came down to him at his dugout and he said to him, Doc, there's a man shot to pieces up in the trenches. There's no way I can bring him down. Could you come up? So my father said he crawled up into the trenches. He realised, he put his arms round the man, he realised nothing he could do for him. The man spoke to him. Doc, do you believe there is a God? And Daddy was shaken to the core of his being. So he said must have been a perceptible pause before he said to the man, yes, I do believe there is a God. And then the second time, the man said to him, Doc, do you really believe there is a God? And Daddy said, he spontaneously then said, yes, I do believe. And the man said to him, Doc, I wish I had your faith. And he died in my father's arms. he had spoken about the fact that, you know, when the weather and the heat, the whole problem of, if you like, the stench of dead bodies.
And getting the bodies buried, and then they'd stop for a few days, maybe 4 or 5 days, on both sides.
On both sides to
the
bury.
men would be up, you know, collecting the bodies and burying them, and handing each other cigarettes and so on. So there was camaraderie, you know, when it came to the crunch, and they were all the same. They all had their loved ones to bury, and they all, you know, fell in and helped each other. Cigarettes helped.
My darling mother, here I am on another hospital ship bound for Alexandria, after experiencing the most exciting, dangerous and terrifying time that one could imagine.
Your father's letters, very few survive, as I understand.
The only letters that survived are the 2 letters that he wrote immediately after the evacuation.
Such an explosion, flames which people on ships estimated mounted up 300 feet high in the air, and we were helpless. Wood, stones, bombshells came flying at us and struck the ship, and in fact hit every one of us.
And in the letter to his mother, there's an extraordinary description of the experiences that he's had, how terrifying, and
yes,
how...
That's right. The most terrifying life in the time in his life.
The last thing I saw of Helles was our ships pumping shells into our hospital, and the Turks shrapneling W Beach, still thinking there were troops there. Nobody can believe we had such a time and come through it alive, but here we are.
It's obvious that my father had tremendous affection for his mother. He really loved her, but I think he always wrote to his mother, my darling mother. It was my dear mother. But the funny part about it was, I always thought it was very funny, the way he signed his letters to her. He always signed his letters, your loving son, Andrew J. Horn.
Your loving son, Andrew J. Horn.
He didn't say Andrew or Andy or anything else. He just said Andrew J. Horn. It was a Victorian era, you know.
Tell me about the trip that you made to Gallipoli to see where your father had served.
It was quite incredible.
War is terrible. It brought home to us the futility of war. You suddenly get overwhelmed inside. You fill up, really. You suddenly hit you. This is, are we really here? Imagine this is the same sea as coming in and going out. I must say that it was very moving. We had a very happy trip as well. He never gave the British High Command for Gallipoli. So many of the men came back and they suffered terribly and had really terrible repercussions mentally as well as physically. And he felt that they had not received the recognition that was due to them.
Well, 100 years on, we're beginning to remember. And for the centenary, the sisters are happy to hand over their precious album to Collins Barracks in Dublin.
This is an amazing photographic album because a lot of photographic albums that we get, the photographs are taken away from the front. They're of people relaxing behind the trenches, but here these are all very much action shots. You can see the ebb and flow of the battle. I'm fascinated by this little picture here of a crashed British Army aeroplane, which kind of shows you the changing nature of war. They're trying to use new technology to change it, sometimes not with great success in this case of the crash plane. So the war is very much about technological change, and it really does have a huge impact on Ireland, of course, but also on the world afterwards. When I saw the album, when they brought in the album to me, I was quite excited. It's unique from a history point of view. It wouldn't have a huge monetary value, but for for the museum and for the curators here at the museum, it's very historically important. What you have here is an almost day-by-day account of the Gallipoli campaign, action shots, scenes of the hospital that he was working in, prisoners coming along, and then he has time to kind of look at the battlefields a couple of weeks after the big battles and see where a lot of Irishmen would have died. So from a historical point of view, it's quite unique.
We are so delighted that the album is here, and it'll be here for future generations and of interest to Ireland. So my father really would be, I know he would be very, very happy, amazed and astounded and disbelieving, if you like, that this is where it would have ended up, you know.
And they did give their lives and they did make sacrifices, all the soldiers who died out there, you know, to give us the freedom that we're now enjoying. My father would never have thought of it landing up here, and he must be, if they can be proud as Punch up there in heaven, he must be as proud as Punch to have it down here, to have it in safekeeping for generation to generation.
And you can see the album as part of a special World War I exhibition entitled From Mons to Gallipoli here at Collins Barracks, opening in October.
Just before we leave you, a reminder that you might like to take a look inside your own attic and ask questions about members of your family, because you never know, they too may have been part of all of this forgotten history.
And hopefully we'll be bringing you more stories from the Great War in this centenary. From us, good evening.
Ihwagwif. There's no Nationwide on Bank Holiday Monday, but on next Wednesday's Nationwide, the story of an RNLI boat which was involved in a famous sea rescue but was abandoned in Dublin port. It's now been returned to her home port in Cork, where she will be restored to her former glory.
More tales of bravery and fortitude next week as relatives of the Irish men and women who went to the front retrace the steps of their ancestors. My Great War, Monday and Tuesday at 9:35 here on RTE1. Next tonight, Reeling in the Years.